And you'll see if that's someone trying to hear. You got it.
I think everyone's in. All right, well, we'll start with our member introductions first. We're a little bit low on members, but let's start with our most senior member that's on the call. So Wendy Sue, go ahead.
Hi, folks. Nice to see everybody. I am Wendy Sue Harper. I'm a soil scientist and I'm filling the soil biology position. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy Sue. Who's out in the room with you? Is that Jonathan Chamberlain? Hi, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Jonathan Chamberlain, Certified Crop Advisor.
Thanks. Welcome. All right, and then on the call for members, we have a couple new members. So first, Brian, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, we can't hear you.
Nope. Microphone's not working.
All right, I'm going to come back to you, Brian. Hold on while you do that. So Pam, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name's Pam Wadman. I'm the Senior Environmental Health Risk Assessor with the Department of Health, and I'm on the committee now to replace Sarah Owen, who was the state toxicologist and has now moved on. Nice to meet you. I'm happy to be here. I have about 20 years of experience, and I have served on a pesticide control board in the state of New Hampshire, so I have a little bit of experience in this field. Looking forward to hearing the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Yes, we're saddened to see Sarah go, but we're happy to have you join us. So thanks for stepping in. Brian, you want to give it another try? Nope. Can't hear you.
What's
Don't
going
worry,
on?
Well, Brian can.
Maybe he just why
Yeah,
doesn't he just call in on the phone?
Sure, you can.
Yeah,
On your invite, you should see some numbers. Yeah, phone number to call.
Yeah.
Okay, so while you're doing that, let's. Why don't you go around in the room there? Who else is with you, Steve?
Steve Doinell, Director of the Farm Division.
All right, Stephanie Smith. I'm just going to turn my camera on for a little bit. Stephanie Smith with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture with Public Health and Ag Resource Management.
Pam Breyer, agrochemical toxicologist with the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets.
Oh, there's Steve Schubert.
Great, and Steve Schubert, we see you join. You want to just give a quick intro?
Steve Schubert, representing beef, part of the board.
Great, welcome. Thanks for joining. Okay, who else we got? How about Jill?
Jill Goss, agricultural input specialist with the agency.
Thanks. Jean?
Thanks, Morgan. I'm Gene Harrington with the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, and I cover state issues for bio.
Thanks, Jean. Dylan?
I'm Dylan Gabbard. I'm with CropLife America and RISE.
Clark?
Clark Parmalee. I'm an inspector with the Agency of Ag.
Thanks, Clark. Rosemary?
Hi, I'm Rosemary Malfi. I'm with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Usually Emily May is attending these meetings, but she's away today.
Thanks, Rosemary. Jared?
Good afternoon, everyone. Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee. Good to see you all.
Thanks for joining, Jared. And I'm Morgan Griffith. I work for the Agency of Agriculture. And think that's all we've got. Did I miss anybody? Oh, just as I said that. Brian, is that you on the phone? Maybe. Brian, are you on the phone?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Sorry about that. I don't know why. Every time I get on Teams, I have a microphone issue. I'm Brian Kemp. I manage Mountain Meadows Organic Beef Farm down in Sudbury.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for joining us. Okay.
Oh, Morgan, you're
Oh,
on mute.
sorry. I'm in the office, so there's a lot of background noise. But yeah, so I sent out the meeting minutes from August, and I didn't hear back for any revisions. But so our members who received those are okay without any further revisions to those minutes. Seeing nods, great. And then so today we just have two major things on the agenda, and the first is Jean Harrington, who's going to give us an update on kind of Munich regs from around the country. And then we're going to have a discussion on best management practices for neonic treated seeds and neonic pesticides, as is our charge from the legislative session last session. And so before we get into Jean's presentation, we are dedicating our Agency of Ag update. Pam Breyer is going to give us kind of an update on PFAS activities. Go ahead, Pam.
I have presented to all of you a couple times updates on Act 131. The Act 131 is a PFAS consumer products ban project that was directed to DEC to explore how to potentially remove PFAS from consumer products. So over the course of the summer, DEC directed meetings that the Agency of Agriculture participated in. And all of that work kind of came to a close about 3 weeks ago when a document of proposed legislation was developed and an accompanying report. And once I'm done speaking, I'll send Morgan those two documents and send them out, and you all can have a look. Those documents were made public on the DEC webpage and available for public comment. That public comment closed on Friday. This morning, I got an email. There are 21 comments received, and we will be reviewing those this week. So from the most notable highlights for AIB, the consumer products ban, as proposed currently, has an exemption for FIFRA registered pesticides. And that is because the pesticides have already gone through a risk review in a way that other products haven't. So it's a higher standard in order for a product to be allowed under FIFRA. And it's not, and I should say there's a couple caveats to that. So the definition of PFAS that was developed in the document has an exemption for any chemical that is toxicologically similar to PFAS. So if there was a FIFRA registered chemical and it behaved similarly to a PFAS chemical, then it would not be exempt from that ban. The other kind of notable aspect to the consumer product ban is it has a fairly broad definition of intentionally added PFAS. So at this point, if the PFAS, as written, the PFAS concentration is high enough, it is assumed that the PFAS was intentionally added. And that's related to what happened when we started talking about food. And essentially we moved to ask that food not be included as a consumer product for this portion of the consumer product ban. And that's definitely, I just say like everyone is very concerned about PFAS in food, but it went beyond the development of this proposal. And as a second follow-up to that is that this proposed legislation directs the Agency of Agriculture, Food Markets to develop a response and a report to the General Assembly for a recommendation on how the state should try to deal with PFAS in food in Vermont. So those are the two most relevant parts for AIB. We'll be meeting this week to go through comments, and then it should be going to the General Assembly within the next week or two. And if you guys are interested in discussing it later, reach out to Morgan. I'm sure we can come back and go through the nitty-gritty in a future meeting. But that's it.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just writing those down. Yeah, so just let me know. Also, I'll share what Pam sends me probably when I send out the minutes. So I'll send those out with all the documents and just review and let me know if you want to talk about it more, and we can for a future agenda item. All right, I think that Jean, we are ready for your update.
Super. Thanks, Morgan. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and get my slides up here. Can everyone see the slide presentation?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. So, Morgan, again, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with the AIB, and really just want to kind of update folks on some notable federal and state activity related to neonic treated seed. Obviously, Vermont took a fairly significant action this past June when it enacted legislation restricting the use of neonic treated seed, but there were a handful of other federal and state neonic treated seed activities, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes walking through those. So I'm going to break this presentation down in basically two phases. The first, I'm going to walk through just some federal activity, and then I'll pivot to state activity and wrap it up, and happy to take questions from there. So first, federal activity. So in late 2022, US EPA indicated to the Center for Food Safety and a number of other environmental groups that they had rejected their petition from 2017 urging or petitioning EPA to regulate neonic treated seed. EPA cited a number of reasons why it wasn't going to take that action, but first and foremost, it noted that it already takes into account the potential risks for the use of treated seed via its pesticide registration process and its registration review process, which is essentially a renewal of state pesticide licensing. So in doing that, though, they also did indicate that they plan to work further with states and investigate further ways to more closely regulate pesticide treated seed. And in that 2022 response, they indicated that they would be putting forward advanced notice of proposed rulemaking to essentially solicit input on how it could and should more closely regulate treated seed. So indeed, it did that late last year. So specifically in October of last year, US EPA did issue an advance notice of proposed rulemaking seeking additional information pertaining to the use of pesticide-treated seed and paint products, which are essentially treated articles. So it accepted comments on that advance notice of proposed rulemaking until February 9th of this year. And in addition to that, EPA is also going through what's known as the registration review process. And what that is it's every 15 years, under a 1996 law that was enacted, US EPA has to review all of the pesticides that have been registered to ensure that it's using the most contemporary data and advanced science, to assess pesticides that are on the market. So it's time for the neonics to go through that review, and they currently are going through it. And a decision on the neonicotinoids is expected in 2025. And as part of that registration review process, they are looking at the seed treatment use pattern, and they are looking at potential risk mitigation measures. So, I mean, that could include reducing the use rate to treat seeds. It could include a number of different mitigation measures. We'll have to see exactly what they require the registrants to do, but I certainly think that that's a notable activity that folks should be aware of. So pivoting to state activity, we have had a handful of actions that are certainly worth noting. So one of the more recent actions took place in California. So specifically on September 22nd, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed into legislation that essentially establishes labeling requirements for pesticide treated seed bag labels. So specifically, this law that is going to require that a label be contain the highest signal word of substances that are used to treat seeds. So in a lot of cases, a treated seed may have multiple substances. It may have a fungicide. It may have an insecticide on it. So this requirement is going to dictate that the highest level signal word be on that label or the bag tag. So, for instance, let's say a fungicide has a caution signal word and the pesticide has a warning signal word. The label would have to have the warning signal word, to reflect the highest signal word for the substances that were used to treat the seed. And then secondly, the legislation that Governor Newsom just signed into law requires, starting January 1st, 2027, that all pesticide treated seeds that are shipped in or sold in the state of California contain a couple different pieces of information. First, the registration number, the EPA registration number for each of the substances that's used to treat the pesticide. And then secondly, the quantity that was used in the application to treat the seed. So again, this, because it's California, this is certainly worth noting. Obviously, California is a large and influential state, and certainly a significant ag production state as well. So certainly worth noting what California has done here in the last month or so. Also in California, there is ongoing litigation. So the California Department of Pesticide Regulation in 2020 rejected a petition from the National Resources Defense Council, urging the Cal DPR to regulate neonic treated seeds. In February of 2023, NRDC and a number of other groups filed suit against Cal DPR for failing to regulate neonic seed. Now that case was actually supposed to go to trial in May of this year, but the trial date was suspended to allow for DPR and the plaintiffs to engage in some settlement talks. And I believe those settlement talks are actually still ongoing. And obviously, if they do reach a settlement, whatever stipulated the agreement they reach, regarding DPR's, regulation of neonic treated seed, will certainly be a notable development because, again, since California is such a large and influential state, this could certainly have impact on the rest of the country if indeed there is some sort of agreement that is reached between DPR and the plaintiffs. So we'll have to see how that turns out. Another very recent development that is worth noting, on October 15th, so really just about 2 weeks ago, the Natural Resources Defense Council and a number of other environmental groups petitioned the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, urging them to adopt a rulemaking pertaining to the regulation of neonic treated seed. So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has 60 days to respond to this particular petition. So we'll have to see what MDA does next. But certainly this is worth noting. There has been some neonic related legislation in the past couple of years in Minnesota, and NRDC and some other groups are urging the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to move even further beyond some of those legislative bills that have been enacted. So New York, this is probably the activity that is most impacted what's happened in Vermont here in the last several months. So in the spring of this year, Governor Kathy Hochul signed into law legislation that amended last December's Birds and the Bees Protection Act. This was essentially legislation that Governor Hochul negotiated with the New York legislature when she signed the Birds and the Bees Act into law in late 2023. She essentially negotiated some legislation that she thought was going to be a little more workable for the agricultural community, moving forward. So what the legislation that was signed into law in March does is, just like Vermont, starting in 2029, it's going to prohibit anyone from selling neonic treated seed, at least for corn, soybean, and wheat, unless a waiver is issued by the New York Department of Environmental Conservation to the user. So in developing this waiver process, DC, in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture, will promulgate regulations, kind of laying out the rules of the road for farmers in what they need to do in order to be granted a waiver. But some of the things, some of the guardrails that were established in the legislation regarding the waiver include stating that no waiver shall be valid for more than 2 years. So if someone is granted a waiver, that's only good for 2 years, and they would need to reapply or kind of re-meet the conditions that they initially met. And some of those conditions include completing a IPM training course, as well as a pest risk assessment, and a written risk assessment report, completing those. And then limiting the use of those seeds to just the farm property for which was identified in the pest risk assessment. And then some record keeping requirements that the farmer will need to comply with as well. And then the department has to report to the legislature on an annual basis the number of waivers that have been granted. And then finally, the legislation directs that DEC and the Department of Agriculture work in consultation with Cornell University, which is New York's land, to conduct a study identifying practicable and feasible alternatives to the use of neonic pesticides. And that study has to be completed by January 1st of 2026. So, we're actually, as far away as that sounds, it's actually not that far away. And then the last notable state activity I wanted to just note and mention, this doesn't have to do with treated seeds, but this was, one of the more notable state legislative developments just pertaining to neonic insecticide use broadly. So I did at least want to mention this. And that's in late March, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee signed into law legislation restricting consumer residential use of neonic insecticides. So this law is going to go into effect on January 1st, 2026. And person can't use neonic insecticide unless they're a licensed applicator. Now, I think there is an emergency exemption process that the Director of Agriculture can grant in case there's an invasive species outbreak. But for the most part, this is going to severely restrict consumer use of neonic insecticides. So that makes Washington the 13th state to restrict neonic insecticides. Now, some of those states actually have done it administratively, Massachusetts kind of being the best example, but there are now 13 states that restrict neonic insecticides for commercial residential use now. So that's, really all I had. Those are kind of the high points here of the last several months. But did want to at least mention kind of the more noteworthy activities here in 2024. So happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, and Jane, thanks for that. I'm not even sure how to ask this question, but it seems like, there's an increasing number of states looking at some restriction or another on neonicotinoids. And of course, EPA has got, sometime next year we'll be issuing a re-registration decision. Is there discussion amongst the registrants you're aware of for any kind of stewardship program or anything to, mitigate some of the concerns for the product?
So I think as part of the registration review process, I think that EPA has been working with the registrants on a stewardship program for neonic treated seed. I think in addition to the registrants are already having stewardship programs, I think EPA has actually been working with them specifically on a program for stewardship for neonic treated seed. And I know the American Seed Trade Association does have stewardship programs, materials that, they certainly make available pretty widely.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay. So we had a question.
Rosemary.
Hi, thank you. That was a really helpful summary. I really appreciated that. I think my one question about the stewardship programs is, are you aware of what form they take? Are they BMPs? Are they actually taking back, seed that would otherwise have to be disposed of locally? And what is the form of these stewardship programs? What form do they take?
Yeah, I think it's on, use and disposal. I don't know. I'm not aware of take back. I mean, I'd have to check that out specifically, but I think it's probably more on, use and disposal.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Jean.
Yep.
Do you think, so the one, sorry, I'm taking notes at the same time, the one that's in settlement talks, where is that one? That's
Yep.
in
California.
California. So forgive this for being potentially a very naive question. So like what happened? Like what is, if they settle, like what does that mean? Like what are you settling, I guess? Like,
So you're essentially settling the lawsuit. So, the plaintiffs would drop the lawsuit, essentially in exchange for implementation of a negotiated settlement, which I assume would include some sort of, regulatory paradigm.
so saying, okay, so they're basically saying we'll do some sort of regulation. Like that
Yeah.
would be
So,
an idea of a
okay.
settlement is like, okay, we will regulate.
Yeah. So,
treated seeds. Yeah,
Cal
okay.
DPR would agree to some sort of regulatory oversight of the use of treated seed.
Sorry, I wasn't following. Got it. Well, thank you very much. And if anybody else thinks of more questions, I'm always happy to give Jean a call if we come up with something after the fact. But thank you, Jean, very much for sharing with us.
Yep. Thanks, Maureen.
Yeah. Okay, so next, I'm going to hand it over to Steve to introduce draft BMPs. And then it's just going to be opening up to discussion. I saw about a few members put in comments, so thank you. And so we'll just kind of talk through.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And Maureen, you said the comments, were they received by email or are they in the chat or?
Nope, they're in the document. So they're like,
Oh, they're in the documentary. Okay,
yeah,
they were
like
in
through
there.
track
All right.
changes. Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, great. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. So we are going to have a discussion about this proposal that has been drafted so far by the agency for best management practices for the use of neonicotinoid treated article seeds and neonicotinoid pesticides. And if you recall, we had drafted a proposed set of best management practice rules beginning earlier this year to meet a deadline that the legislature had set for March 1st, 2024, which we met that deadline and provided to them. And then subsequently, and when they enacted Act 182, they added a requirement that we include best management practices for the use of neonicotinoid pesticides in general for uses that were otherwise prohibited by the act. So we went back, talked. I think we've had at least one discussion about that here in this meeting or this board. But now we're back again, and I will go ahead and just sort of jump the gun a little bit. We also received a proposal of a set of best management practices from the, I guess it was a joint effort between the Xerxes Society and University of Vermont. Yeah, we certainly want to talk about those too, and those were provided to the board members to look at and comment on. And we'd like to sort of cover both of them today at this meeting if we have time. And formally, I guess we ought to do this as the Xerxes Society UVM one is public comment, but we can navigate that. But let's start with the BMPs that the agency produced. And Morgan, is your sense everyone's had a chance to look at it? We don't need to go through it and read it, do we? Or what are you thinking?
I think, I mean, I know people who left comments looked at it. So that's Brian and Wendy Sue.
And Yeah, I want to go, we'll just go ahead and read it.
So I think, yeah, I think the idea of at least the structure, right? Like, so like the two things that we needed and then the structure
Yeah.
and then the applicability of them. So in each kind of section has a different of like when that section
Yeah,
like
right. Okay,
is,
so I'll just kind of go through it.
yeah,
So, you know, the section 1 just describes the authority for enacting a rule and the purpose of the rule, which is to establish best management practices. And it does say that unless otherwise stated, these practices are recommended best practices to be used where reasonable and practical. And that is because as best management practices, there are practices that are recommended for use and intended to achieve the aims of minimizing any environmental or you know, health exposure. But they're not enforceable standards in the sense that they are prescriptive requirements that have to be met. They are recommended best management practices. And that's consistent with some other practices that the agency has in that regard. So that's the purpose. Definitions, and in the definitions section, we, wherever possible, referenced existing definitions and other rules or statute to avoid creating any confusion by having, you know, multiple definitions of the same thing in different rules. Except we did add definitions that are pertinent to the requirements that are established in Act 182. So agricultural emergency, environmental emergency. We specifically defined container as a device in which the treated article seed is stored, transported, disposed of, or otherwise handled. The integrated pest management, again, that's just sort of a standard definition. The comment was to include the tenants, which, you know, we should discuss. So what are, and, you know, as I'm going along, if anybody has any comments, you know, any of the board members have any comments, please let me know or let us know. And I guess, Stephanie, if you can sort of keep an eye on that,
Yeah.
you know, on the chat or the hands coming up or,
yeah. So Wendy Sue, do you want to kind of talk through your comment about the tenants, IBM tenants?
Sure. I just felt the definition was incredibly vague, and I thought that it should, and I included a link to EPA, their definition of IPM. I know that you can find it in textbooks and other places, but so I thought that those things should be included because there's a process you follow in IBM, and we should say a little more about what it is. You know, you set those action thresholds, you do the monitoring and IDing, you use your preventative strategies first, and then you go to control with pesticides being your last resort. So that's why I put that comment there.
any other board members? And just to reiterate, what we're doing here today is just getting the comments from the board. I mean, we're still going to have, the agency's still going to have to go back and determine what the, you know, form the rule will take. And we are going to have to go through formal rulemaking where there's a lot of opportunity for public comment and input too. So the purpose today is to get the board comments. And I guess one way we could do this as we go through here, you know, we'll get the comments, but at the end, I'm going to put, you know, I'm going to ask each board member what they, you know, their opinion is of the rule, the form it's in, and any comments they have, because we do want to get your comments. Okay. So other definitions, label or labeling, again, that we included this definition, although labeling is well defined in other rules that we have and when it comes to pesticide rules, but we wanted to make sure it included the seed containers loading, and it also means we included a definition to include using or loading the article seed. Yeah, I guess the rest are pretty self-explanatory. The definition of use was included to include the uses of the seed itself, including transporting and loading and planting of the seed. I guess one question I'll have right off the bat, are there any definitions that any of the board members feel like we should have included or that we missed that were not included? And if you think of something later, I mean, you can always email us, let us know. Section 3, best management practices, applicability, provisions apply to the use of neonicotinoid treated article seeds when used prior to January 1, 2029, and when used under a valid exemption order issued by the secretary. As I'm sure you know, the Act 182 has a provision where the secretary can issue an exemption order allowing the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds under certain circumstances. General provision is a person who uses a neonicotinoid treated article seed should adhere to the label requirements. Where provisions of the rule conflict with label language, the label language applies. One thing I'll point out here is that's fairly important provision because as EPA moves through its re-registration process and enacts their proposed rulemaking on treated seed, some of the label language may become very important. So I'll just point that out. Label guidance, a person using a neonicotinoid treated article seed should follow the directions requirements on the treated article seed bag, including proper handling, storage, use, and disposal, recommended rate and depth of planting, and hazard statements related to pollinators. The 3.04 dust and non-target exposure mitigation. This is an important part of it. And I'll also point out that this is a subject of research that's Heather Darby's working on right now, and we'll be working on next year to try to determine what are the best procedures for minimizing dust. So the provisions are that a person using a neonicotinoid treated article seed should minimize dust generation and potential drift from the seed by avoiding planting during windy conditions greater than 50 miles per hour, and when wind is blowing toward nearby surface water flowering crops, handling seed bags carefully during transport and loading to reduce abrasion and dust generation, using dust reducing seed lubricants and avoid using lubricants that increase dust due to abrasion, ensuring that the planter is calibrated and functions properly, avoiding or releasing excess dust from a seed bag. Actually, there's a typo there. Including by loading planters at least 10 yards in sealed side field borders and cleaning planting equipment without using compressed air. And there was a comment, was that from Brian?
It's from Ryan Rebozo, and I don't think he's on the call right now.
He is not on the call. You're right.
I'm on.
Are you?
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes.
I'm on my, yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
My comment, I can't see it. I don't know if you can scroll down. It was weeks ago. I made it, and I was.
Yeah.
If you can just remind me.
Yeah. So can we include example methods for C and F? Dust reducing seed lubricants and cleaning planting equipment.
That was not my comment. No, I commented more on the timeline of warning people, beekeepers. So I don't know how that got my initials on it.
Yeah, it didn't actually. So I think we're just having trouble with between Brian and Ryan. So Ryan Rebozo left that comment. Yep. Sorry,
Sorry,
but we haven't gotten to your comment yet.
I got your comment yet. Okay, so
Brian,
anybody
comment.
have any comments on these?
I do want to say I know that Ryan Rebozo is not here. I think for C, exactly what Steve just said, using dust reducing seed lubricants, I think we might be able to provide examples of that once we receive Heather's research. Like that's exactly a question that she's been researching this year. And again, next year. So I think, yes, yeah, like I think I agree with Brian's, but we might have more information when we get more results.
Right. Yeah, the other thing I'll say is that there can be a lot of information provided in materials that accompany the rule itself. So, it'd be, hopefully what will happen is UVM will develop guidance that expands upon what's in the rule and provides those examples. We don't necessarily need to put them in the rule to get the information out about what to use.
And I would just to add Stephanie off the screen on purpose, but like if you put it in the rule, like it does make it somewhat static, but an update of educational materials that accompany and are that the agency shares and UVM shares makes it more dynamic and it progresses with, as technology changes. And so it's less static. So I just wanted to make a plug for being a little flexible here and not including specific recommendations within the rule.
Can it just say, or as described in UVM extension materials, or refer to extension in the rule? Does that help provide specificity?
And that can be a problem if the extension materials change or, you have to, typically in a rule, if you cite something, you have to cite this very specific document, number, date, published by, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the other ones are cleaning, planting equipment without contaminating surface water or pollinator attractive habitats, disposing of excess rinse water within the crop field without causing surface spawning, not broadcasting plant or scatter seeds to soil surface, ensuring that all planted seeds are thoroughly incorporated during planting and evaluate whether additional incorporation is necessary after initial planting to thoroughly cover any exposed seeds, and collecting any seeds spilled during loading and planting and store them for subsequent planting, or dispose of any seeds in accordance with section 3.08. So 3.05 is integrated pest management. A person using a neonicotinoid treated article seed should implement integrated pest management practices, including learning which crop production practices increase or reduce risk, choosing an appropriate rate of neonicotinoid seed treatment that can effectively manage target pests without over application, and utilizing multiple pest management methods to avoid or reduce pest risk wherever feasible. So this is another comment from Wendy Sue, where it says the section does not follow IPM tenets. It might be most useful to show how this would work for corn farmers. And Wendy, so I'll let you go ahead and, expand upon your comment there. If you would.
Okay. Again, I thought that if we're going to provide an example, we probably should use the IPM tenets that, that you set the action thresholds, you monitor, use preventative practices and cultural practices first, and then if those don't work, use a pesticide. And I thought it might be useful to have an example showing how this could be done with people, corn farmers and things, so that if in 2024 preventive cultural things didn't work, here's how you go about and do it to use neonics for 2025. Because it seems like if you're gonna have threshold, you need to have the pest before you use the pesticide. And with treated seed, if you use it without that, you're putting the cart before the horse. So that's why I suggested an example. Anyways, those are my comments.
Jonathan?
So along the IPM lines, I guess I just have a little bit of a concern if you bottleneck it to be as precise as what's being explained. There's a lot more different biological, ecological, weather practices that are in play with these producers, whether it be the insisting on cover crop for water quality, no-till, minimum till, full tillage practices that, when you talk about cultural or other preventative strategies that they may not be able to do as a requirement for erosion control, water quality mandate, practices like that. I think this idea that pesticide is last resort without everything else, they may be cut off at number 3 because they need to put cover crop in. They need to do practices that promote the insect's presence, or, by applying manure, they're inherently, increasing the risk of these insects that then the pesticide would control. So I guess I just worry about bottlenecking that strong of a definition of an IPM when really I think this is a more dynamic situation where producers can't necessarily control all the preventive strategies, cultural, environmental, or ecological, or whatever the criteria for that preventative strategy is. It just concerns me that bottlenecking it to those 4 criterias be met just raises a little concern for me, that's all.
Any other comments from other board members?
Brian?
I would agree with Jonathan on that. I think it's challenging when we're using different practices, and like he said, they can actually enhance the risk of having these pests, and then having something very detailed and like a structured plan, it really limits farmers to what they can do necessarily, and be held to that accountability of using that pesticide as the last resort. If we have these pests, we have to do something with them. And I think I just wanted to say I agree with him about just restricting it too much there, making it too definitive, I guess.
Okay. Any other comments, Steph? See?
I don't see any other hands up.
And again, if you think of something later, just go ahead and email it. Morgan be the best person to send your comments to. Okay. Communication and continuous education. No person should use a neonicotinoid treated article seed without prior notification of at least 48 hours to any apiculturist who has an established apiary on the premises. A person using a neonicotinoid treated article seed should attend reasonably available education and outreach programs, including those provided by University Extension Services or the seed industry related to best management practice for using neonicotinoid treated article seeds. Any comments?
Brian has a comment.
Yeah, I commented on this. Again, I think it's in the lines of being too prescriptive. I think during planting season, it's very challenging sometimes, weather conditions, soil conditions, even on the same farm, you may have multiple soils. And the 48 hours warning the apiaries, I get why it's in there. I think it could be very challenging though, and you might have a field on a given day that you can go plant, and you, for whatever reason, didn't get hold of that beekeeper. It's pretty constrictive here, I think, to have that 48 hours on there. That's all.
Any other comments?
Pam has her hand up.
Sorry.
Pam, I think
I'm
you muted.
Sorry about that. I don't get to too many meetings. I would like to tell you that I need a little bit more time to review this in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to withhold my comments right now because I didn't want to say anything for lack of preparation. So I will get back to you though when I get a chance to do more thorough review. Thank you.
Okay, and certainly if you have any questions while you're doing that, just reach out and we'll provide the information.
Just have a quick question on premises. Is that what, I mean, to me, that is relatively vague of what the because definition of premise is not noted further up, correct?
Yeah, we may have it already. It's already that's basically taken from the existing rule for the control of pesticides 5.04A. See if it's defined in there. Yeah, I don't see a definition of the rule. So if the definition is not in the rule, then it would be generally accepted understanding of what premises are, which would be the property in which you're located,
Within the boundaries of the property.
on which you're, okay, but you certainly record that as a comment that needs to be clarified. Okay, storage. A person using a neonicotinoid treated article seed should return the neonicotinoid treated article seed that is spilled during loading or planting to the original seed lot container. And a person using I'm just going to say NTS, save a little time here, using an NTS should store that seed away from food and feed stuff and protect and secure them, prevent unauthorized access by people and wildlife. And then disposal, unless being used for storage, a person using an NTS shall dispose of the treated article seeds and containers in accordance with the seed bag label and local requirements or returning to the manufacturer. And a person using a NTS should not recycle the seed container, compost any treated article seed, burn or otherwise incinerate, or use treated seed for fuel or ethanol production purposes. Any comments on that? Nope. Okay. Section 4. So this is the section that includes the material that was added as a result of Act 182. Best management practices for use of a neonicotinoid pesticide. The provision of this section shall apply to the use of a neonicotinoid pesticide when used after July 1, 2025, under a valid exemption order issued by the Secretary, unless otherwise provided for in an exemption order. They will provide, it also applies to agricultural use of a neonicotinoid pesticide after July 1, 2025, the use of which is otherwise not prohibited by law. In addition to the provision of this section, any use of a neonicotinoid pesticide shall be made in accordance with product labels in the Vermont Rule for the Control of Pesticides. And that's shall language as opposed to should, because that's really just restating the obvious. So any comments on this section?
I think everyone on the call knows, but all outdoor use of neonicotinoid pesticides any pesticide registered for outdoor use is a restricted use pesticide in the state of Vermont. Right. Yeah. Just provide context.
Okay. So there's another integrated pest management section here. A person using a neonicotinoid pesticide should implement integrated pest management practices, including learning which crop production practices increase or reduce risk, choosing the lowest appropriate labeled application rates. Yeah, I'm just not reading the whole sentence here, just sort of highlighting scouting crop regularly, using economic thresholds, using parameter trap crop treatments, refuge plantings, and other methods that prevent the entire field or population from being treated, timing applications to target most vulnerable life stage of the target pest, targeting applications to specific areas of a crop or field utilizing spot spraying, direct sprays, or band application, and utilizing multiple pest management methods, cultural, mechanical, biological, to avoid or reduce pest risk wherever feasible. And when you see you have essentially the same comment.
Yes, but also on this one, I thought that they should be reordered to kind of follow the tenets of IPM. So the, cultural practices would come first and, that kind of stuff. I did think that we should put in that, you would set your thresholds and do all of that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? All right, drift prevention. A person using a neonicotinoid pesticide should implement measures to reduce drift, including using a nozzle that produces medium or coarser droplet sizes, applying during favorable weather conditions, using a drift retardant or spray additive within label guidance, using a shielded sprayer, provided that the shield does not compromise uniform deposition, maintaining at least a 25-foot spray buffer zone between the application area and surface water for ground applications, and a 150-foot spray buffer zone for aerial applications, maintaining a boom height of no more than 4 feet above the canopy for ground applications and no more than 10 feet above the canopy for aerial applications, and spraying when the wind direction is pointed away from non-target areas of concern. Any comments on that? Anything you see then? Okay. Spills. A person using a neonicotinoid pesticide should implement measures to prevent spills, including mixing or loading away from water bodies and ditches, using a designated spill containment surface, otherwise maintain a 25-foot buffer from potential surface groundwater conduits, and maintaining an incident response plan. No comments. Runoff and prevention. A person using a neonicotinoid pesticide should implement measures to prevent runoff, including avoiding applications during rain or when soil is saturated, avoiding foliar applications if rain is predicted in the next 24 or 48 hours, avoiding disposal of leftover pesticide down a drain or in a single spot in a field, maintaining grass or vegetative buffers near tile outlets and draining ways along field boundaries, and implementing residue management practices, for example, conservation tillage or cover cropping as applicable to slow runoff.
Rosemary had a comment on noting that the recommendations from the Xerces Society recommend bigger buffer distances between application and water.
Which we'll get to.
And we'll get to that. I just wanted to acknowledge that the comment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Doing your job. Thank you. Okay. Pollinator protection. A person using a neonicotinoid pesticide should implement measures to prevent exposure to pollinators, including avoiding applications during unusually low temperatures or when dew is forecast, communicating with apiculturists and growers to determine the presence of potential hives or colonies on site, following label restrictions for the maximum amount of neonicotinoid allowed per acre, per application, per season, per year, taking into account that neonicotinoids applied as seed treatments count towards maximum application rates, and leaving a buffer strip of 2 to 3 feet between neonicotinoid treated turf and the border of any landscape bed to minimize the potential of flowering ornamental roots taking up neonicotinoids. Any comments on any of those? BMPs?
Do you know if we have anybody here that actually utilizes these types of products for ornamentals and turfs and has some input on it?
We have had some discussions with the Vermont.
Nursery and Landscape Association. We've invited comments from them
Right.
concerning the act. And
Yeah, we're gonna have to have more discussions with them.
yeah.
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 I mean, they'll certainly have the opportunity to comment during the rulemaking process. And actually, just a little bit of an aside, the Act 182 actually is gonna have a pretty big impact on them, which we've communicated to them.
Yeah, perennial, ornamental includes perennial plants, which includes a whole host of plants. And the act prohibits the use on ornamental plants as defined, so it's pretty extensive.
Just pretty broad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you as far as on the crop side of things, neonics are not something that we apply in a manner like that. So, you know, I'm sure for our sake, does not have a major impact as of now, but I would assume from my understanding, whether it be golf courses or other places, this is a used product.
Yeah, turf is you
Well,
can
Act 182 did not include any
Not-
restrictions on turf,
turf, so there are no restrictions on turf.
other than what's on the label already.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so that's the rule as drafted. And like I said, we're, certainly would welcome any other comments from board members if they've looked at it a little more carefully, or certainly after the discussion we're about to have, which may trigger some ideas that you have. It's another set of thoughts about the whole thing. So with that, I'll go ahead and we'll close this part of the discussion. And I think on the agenda, that segues nicely into public comments, where we can now go into public comments. And we did receive the board members received a letter from the, I guess it's a combination or a collaboration of the Xerxes Society and the UVM. And unless somebody has something else they want to talk about first, we can go in and start discussing that, unless there's another topic any of the board members want to bring up. Okay. Is Morgan, you still here?
I am still here. You got me for probably 40 more minutes.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay, so Morgan, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Oh, sure. Okay, so I shared with you the letter that we received from Xerxes Society that was co-signed by some other UVM and other Stephanie, you can pull it up if you want. But other universities, people that we've heard from, right? So Dr. Scott McGart, Samantha Alger, also from the B Lab at UVM, a professor emeritus at Penn State in entomology, Cornell, in their New York State IPM division, and also a extension from University of Nebraska. So those are people who co-signed this document. And so I guess if members, I provided that we got this last week. I sent it along. I know we haven't had it as long as we've had the other rule to comment on. But I guess first things first, before I keep talking, do any members
Morgan,
have? Yeah.
Why don't we ask Rosemary?
Yeah, Rosemary, go ahead.
Xerxes took the lead, just talk about it some first, maybe to set the stage for the discussion.
Sure. Go ahead, Rosemary.
Sure. I will say Emily May would be a much better person to be here, but unfortunately, she's just happens to be traveling today. So I mean, you know, it's a very detailed document. So I don't know if we're going to go through that or if you're all just going to read it on your own and discuss it. But I mean, we worked with experts in the field to pull together a set of best management practices, both for treated seed use, but also for, neonic applications generally. And what I will say is, a lot of what you just went through in your draft document, you'll see that echoed in our BMPs. I will say ours probably go a bit, or sometimes much more beyond that. So for example, like for the disposal section, right? Right now, I think your draft document just says to follow the label. And that's, that's the advice you get from the Treated Seed Stewardship Council as well. We have some additional recommendations, based on what we know are practices that are happening. So the seed labels are not often, I mean, maybe this will all change, right? Like with the presentation at the beginning, there's a lot sort of in the works. But at the moment, the seed labels are not always very clear about disposal methods. They'll say like, oh, just plant it, or, dispose of it according to your local waste guidelines or whatever. It doesn't specifically say, don't bury a bunch of it next to a water source, for example, even though, you would hope that someone wouldn't do that. I think that kind of thing probably does happen. So it is a little more specific than just saying to follow the label. And it goes beyond, what I think, even the Treated Seed Stewardship Council, as far as I know, recommends for storage and disposal. We also, specifically reference, not surprisingly, pollinators in here. We have some recommendations for protecting habitat, because we know lots of growers are trying to establish, pollinator habitat and engage in other conservation practices on their land. So this offers some guidance about how to protect pollinators, from pesticide drift. And then as I mentioned in the chat, our buffer distances for water sources between where an application is being done and where water sources for different forms of application are wider, much wider than 25 feet. So in our estimation, thank you for pulling that up. 25 feet is often not actually sufficient. And you'll see that I believe we also recommend that aerial application just be avoided entirely. So there are some differences between the document as written and what we recommend. I'm happy to dig in further to any particular section. It's pretty long, so I don't know if we want to go. I don't know how you'd like to facilitate that.
One way we could do this is, this was provided to the board members a few days ago. I mean, shortly after we got it. So what we could do is see if anybody has any comments now, or any questions. So we can always bring it back to the next board meeting. I mean, maybe when Emily's available, we could schedule her for a presentation. She can walk through it, or one of the other, other folks who were involved in the development of it certainly be welcome to come and make a presentation. So, but I think maybe the first thing to do is go ahead and just see if anybody has any comments or questions right now from the board.
Someone has a hand up. I'm sorry, I can't see names.
Go ahead, Wendy Sue.
Overall, I thought these were very thoughtful comments, and I thought we should incorporate some of them into the document.
If you, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have a comment actually, as a board member. First of all, it's very detailed, but I do think that it's kind of the way it's written. It's more appropriate for an extension publication than for incorporation into a rule. There, like Wendy said, there are some points I think we could consider putting into a draft rule for the rulemaking process. But I think almost as written, though, I think it would make a very useful guidance document for growers. You know, BMP document, you know, distributed by UVM to provide, because it has more detail than we would put into a rule, you know, more specific, and it could even be expanded further with more specific information, especially after or as Heather Darby's research gets finalized.
Right.
So,
Thank you for that comment. And I'll relay that to Emily.
I was just gonna say, Wendy, too, if you have specific ones, like what, like some of the things that you would want to see added to the draft rule, even, you can even just like highlight the document and send it to me, or however you want to communicate that to us. And that goes for any other member too. If you see something that you think should be part of the rule or want to make that suggestion, somehow let me know in whatever way is easiest.
And I guess I would ask back if there are particular parts of this that seem like they could be easily incorporated into the rulemaking, having that highlighted or understanding what those parts are would be really helpful for us as well.
I'm not a member of
right.
the board.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. No, I was just going to comment on this one right up here currently on the screen. This includes reference to the existing Vermont rule for the control of pesticides. And so in terms of things that might be already under the control of a Vermont rule, it wouldn't be necessary, or am I trying to ask a question here rather than making a statement, but we wouldn't necessarily as an agency need to put it in yet another rule because they operate at the same time.
right, exactly.
Yeah, so
I think you'd reference the existing rule.
you could reference existing rule, or you could leave it out because that rule already applies anyway.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't hurt to reference
Say it again. Okay.
If somebody's looking for a rule that applies to the particular thing they're doing, and we're having another rule, then you just say, follow that rule.
Yeah.
You know.
So I just want to say, we do reference in the draft BMPs to follow the pesticide rule and the label, but not specific sections. So that could be an opportunity to improve if it's like under pollinator, you know what I mean? You could reiterate that again under the pollinator protection section of the draft BMPs to say, follow this section of the pesticide rule, right? So it could be, you spell it out more, it could be an opportunity.
Okay. Yep. Any other questions or comments? You know, I think what we should plan on is having Emily or whoever come back and make a presentation at the next board meeting.
Sure. Yeah.
Because this is pretty detailed. There's a lot of stuff to it. And by then we may have further thoughts about our role. We could have thought some more about it. I don't know. But, okay, so
Can I just say one more thing? Are people interested in seeing the rule where those buffers are pulled from? Just because they've been mentioned a couple times. So I have it up if people would like to see the rule where that is being pulled from.
And this is this section here?
Yes.
Because the citation is, sorry, it's at the bottom of the page. Let me go there.
So it's from the wastewater potable
water supply rules. Okay. Sure.
So we can do that. I mean, we don't have to talk about it now, but I just wanted to reference if that helps people formulate questions around that and or comments.
I'm gonna stop sharing. Morgan, I'm turning it
Sure.
over
Okay.
to you.
Yeah, so maybe we should see if there's any other public comment, anybody
Sure.
wants to. If there's any other. Don't seem to be any. Morgan, you want to talk about our next meeting schedule? What's happening next?
Sure. I can send this link. I mean, yes, it's in the document too for this chart. Our next meeting is on December 9th. So that's the date that the members, that most members voted to attend. So that's kind of splitting the difference between November and December holidays. So it's December 9th, same 1 to 4. And it should be on your calendars, but let me know if it's not. Sometimes Teams and invites screw up. So I think I tried to get it on everyone's calendar, but let me know if it's not on. But it's December 9th. And I will reach out to Emily for an agenda item for her that week. And then I think other action items is just to have AIB members let me know specific things from this Cersei's document to add to draft BMPs, and any other
also-
specific questions. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, I think we should, if we could get members to comment in some, if you haven't commented already, comment on our draft rule. Just send Morgan something. You know,
Sure.
so we have everybody's comments. Everybody's had an opportunity to comment on the agency draft. One thing we should ask too, are there any other agenda items that we need to put on the agenda for the December meeting? Any other things that board members would like to talk about or get information about? We'll have an agency update again, of course. Might have some more PFAS info by then. I don't know, anything else. If you think of something you want to cover, go ahead. Let Morgan know. Okay.
Yep. Thank you. That's all I got. Thank you all.
Okay,
Thank you.
see ya.
Thank you for considering our comments. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Thanks for joining, Rosemary.
Yeah.
Yep, thanks.
Bye.
Boy. So how's things